Hello, I'm Alex McLaren. I'm an actor and I've worked as a communications coach since 2002. Now so much business is being conducted remotely, the ways in which we talk, present, build relationships and connect is changing. In this podcast, I want to explore all those issues and prove to you that no matter who you are, you can talk to anyone. Hello and welcome to You Can Talk to Anyone, the podcast where we open the bonnet on our communications engine. I'm Alex McLaren.
I'm Tom Selinsky.
And this week I wanted to talk about dressing up. So when you go to the Oscars, which you will do, Tom, one
I
day,
hope so.
Someone will stop you on the red carpet and say, "Who are you wearing?"
Yeah.
But today I'm just basically interested in what are we wearing, and I want to talk about the difference that makes. So I'm going to go first, starting from the bottom up. I've got a pair of boots on, which may sound strange for August, but they're new and I'm trying to wear them in. I think they're Cheenies. So the kind of English brown chucker boots from Jermyn Street. I'm wearing a pair of cotton trousers, which are slightly too tight because I put on weight in the lockdown, and I'm wearing a kind of linen sort of gingham shirt because I'm recording this at home and I'm in the holidays. So this is pretty typical for what I would normally wear. Now you.
Well, I've sort of got three standard uniforms, which I've settled on after quite a lot of experimentation. So uniform number one, which is 90% of the time, if not more, would be jeans, a fairly smart shirt, and then, unless it's very hot, some kind of jacket.
Interesting.
And then if I'm doing a corporate event, then typically the jeans get swapped out for suit trousers that match the jacket. And then on these days, very rare occasions, which sort of means a birthday party where there's a 0 at the end of the number or a wedding, the suit gets accessorized with a tie. Now, when I first started doing corporate events, it would be typical for most of the men present to be wearing a tie. Yeah. And I wouldn't want to be underdressed for the occasion, so I would wear a tie. And then as the decades rolled past, eventually I started looking around and noticing that I was the only man wearing a tie.
I'm still that man occasionally.
They've just kind of fallen out of favour.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, I'm always curious about this, and I want to talk about sort of the reasoning behind why interests me in a minute. But yeah, I think that I remember, was it Tony Blair? I mean, for people of our generation, or maybe ever so slightly younger, that he was kind of the first person in a position of authority, really, who decided not to wear ties quite so much. And he was trying to pitch this cool Britannia.
Call me Tony.
Yes, exactly. You know, I mean, and you're wearing a tie. Oh, really? How old-fashioned. That's not the way the bright new future is going to be. And so there was a period when it went away. I suppose the reason that I'm interested in this is our background as performers, in which every choice in a story you should try and make because it has some kind of specific meaning, or is likely to have a particular impact on how people read a person. And I think that to a lesser degree, I think everybody experiences that a little bit in their working and social life, in the way they're engaging with other people. I've been very aware of the shift in the way people dressed during the lockdown.
Oh, yeah.
So that, like you, when we go to work in offices, and again, I must say to those of you listening to this podcast that now that I'm back going into business schools and corporate spaces and events, that we dress up for it. We feel like we're kind of leaning in a particular direction. So it feels like it's sort of the elastic has pulled us straight back to what we remember as a pattern of how we present ourselves in those spaces. But on Zoom, I found that it was very different. So our first video calls when we first started in March 2020, I remembered dressing up for it. I dressed up as if I was going into a corporate space. I put on a shirt and a tie. And I think it was possibly literally that there was one occasion when I tried that and then felt that actually it was sending a kind of rather peculiar and very artificial message, because we weren't actually in a shared space. We were in individual domestic spaces. Some people in tatty attics like me. Some people literally in their bedrooms, in their cramped London flats, because their husband or wife was in the other room on another Zoom call, and they couldn't share the same space for audio reasons.
Yeah, and while you wouldn't expect to see the CEO in a bathrobe and pink fluffy slippers, I think you would probably think about how you would dress if this person was coming round to your house at the weekend, as opposed to how would you dress for the office. But of course, all these distinctions are blurring together as work from home becomes just part of the way that the working day is structured.
Yes, they are. One reason why this interests me is it ties in with these questions about authenticity, which feels like it's very strongly connected to people's sense of confidence. The confidence is the reason that people want to download and listen to podcasts like this one. They're wanting to feel more comfortable and familiar with circumstances which can make feel self-conscious and awkward. And I think the clothes we choose to wear or want to wear is related to that. Let me sort of take you back a little bit. I mean, when I was when you're a child, you're not really thinking too much, I guess. Most children aren't thinking too much about the clothes they wear, except they want to play. So putting on clothes is often about the dressing up box. We had a massive dressing up drawer in the bottom of the sideboard in the big kitchen where my brothers and I always used to go and play. I see that happen with kids. Some kids don't really bother so much with dressing up, although I noticed my 12-year-old was wearing a cape last week when we were visiting my grandparents last week. But then there comes a point in which children are made to dress like each other when they're sent to school, and certainly where I grew up, although not my own primary school, incidentally. We didn't wear a school uniform. And so, but we often start kids very early on the idea that in a certain circumstance and with a particular sort of register of behavior, the formality of school, the fact that we're not with our own families and we have to operate with quite a large group of people with a shared set of rules rather than bringing our own rules from home.
Yeah, there's an attempt to level the playing field, but of course it can never be entirely successful.
Well, this is it. I think this is almost like there's a legacy of that in professional life as well, in that there are often sometimes strict rules, sometimes kind of loose rules about the way we dress when we go and work in, well, we talk about white-collar workers.
Yeah.
And then within that, you can sense people making different kinds of choices. It's obviously very different depending on particular quirks. Like women face, I think, a much bigger challenge than men in this regard. And I think your cultural background and ethnicity brings with it certain expectations, and sometimes those are slightly uncomfortable ones and not necessarily accurate about the way people dress as well.
Do you remember we had a client, and actually the organisation is still somebody that we work for, though that individual has long since moved on to different challenges. But we were brought in to run one of our training sessions about communicating with confidence and so on. But what he wanted to smuggle in was an instruction that people should smarten up.
Yes, I do remember.
He thought they were scruffy.
Yeah,
and we still call that course for that client Image and Impact because that's what his hidden agenda was.
Yes, and in fact, that agenda has become long since obsolete. I mean, for the specifics are quite interesting. This was a professional services organisation. I'll be no more specific than that, but in the City of London. And it was long ago. I think it was about 2005. So it was one of our earliest professional clients. And the challenge was that they were having a dress down Friday. And I know that this still happens in some offices, but it was the guy responsible felt that people were slightly taking the mickey here, and they would show up on a Friday in shorts and sometimes flip-flops in the summer because there was a sense that it was a day off having to wear school uniform. My son still has, they call them mufti days at or tag days at my son's school. But But the feeling was that this was just simply far too casual. I don't imagine any clients were invited onto the premises on Fridays, or maybe that was the reason. But the feeling was that it was giving rise to general a relaxed culture, and he felt that this was not really congruent with the kind of services and the kind of relationship those professionals meant to have with their clients.
But I think the tide has definitely turned, and a more relaxed presentation is definitely something which is these days, frankly, encouraged. I think what it comes down to is it's the peacock's tail, isn't it? You know, there's this evolutionary theory that a male peacock, has a hugely extravagant tail, not because it needs it. In fact, it doesn't. It's an encumbrance. But it is a signal to female peacocks, of peahens, that a gentleman who can disport such an extravagant piece of plumage must be in tip-top physical condition and have simply excellent genes, which are well worth combining with.
Yeah.
So likewise, if your office is clean, if your stationery is well designed, if your brochures and presentations have attractive and expensive-looking photography on them, that sort of suggests that you're a company that cares about the details and is doing well. And so likewise, if everybody is very smartly dressed with polished shoes and crisply ironed shirts and creases down the front of their trousers, that suggests that same attention to detail is going to be found elsewhere.
Yeah.
But you don't have to dress very formally, I don't believe, in order to give that impression.
Well, it's absolutely the case. And it's interesting that some of our clients aren't in the city professional services Venn circle. They're in the tech universe. You know, they're kind of they're programmers, or they're doing social media, and the people who work there are all substantially younger than you and me. And the thought that they would dress in suits would be kind of like a character coming on stage in totally the wrong costume. Yeah, and in fact, it's funny. When I was first thinking about this as a topic, I was thinking back to our first when we were first working together. We weren't tramping into offices, sort of talking about these issues for the workplace. We were performing on stage in improv shows, and the costume for an improv show is basically, for most improvisers, your own clothes, or sometimes a kind of a branded T-shirt. Your own clothes in our case. I've never found myself in sympathy with the branded T-shirt approach to being a performing company. And I remember, because our background was Keith Johnston based improv, I remember Keith's injunction about this was clear. He said, dress really nicely, dress in ways that make you look and feel good, because the show will go better if the audience wants to sleep with you. And I think there's certainly an element of that people want to wear clothes that make them feel sexy, and sometimes work clothes don't. I was really intrigued by not just what the clothes people wear, but the way they do their hair. It's different when you're going to a party than when you're going to a business meeting. Yeah. And in the lockdown, in fact, one thing which was really fascinating was how people released different parts of their personality because they were no longer able to get their hair cut. I mean, there was one extraordinary meeting we had, I think, with a bunch of lawyers, and I was wearing I happened to be wearing just a plain white shirt, so it was kind of businessy. But I'd had my at the time my missus had shorn my hair quite short in the way that we were all doing to each other. And on the call came I think half a dozen lawyers, and 4 of them were men, and they all had enormous beards. This was quite a long way into the lockdown. I think they could have had their hair cut by a professional, but they'd chosen to continue with the facial hair experiment, and which is just so intriguing, because that felt like it was where the boundary of professional presentation and the sort of the true domestic personality of the person doing that job was being completely kind of elided because of the COVID pandemic, and people were really seizing the opportunity to bring a different side of their individual selves to work, which I think for people in modern businesses, in tech businesses, is also a kind of peacock's tail, in that they're saying, we're doing something so important and so cutting edge. Trivial matters like wearing the uniform of a person at work don't really apply to us. I remember we were, I think it was maybe you telling me that you'd seen a set of presentations at a conference in which people spoke in a sequence, and the sequence became more senior. And as the seniority increased, the formality of the clothing decreased.
That's right, and the formality of the manner of interaction. It wasn't a conference. It was just it was almost like a tour. It was a small group of us, and yes, it's true. The first people who spoke to us were very young, dressed up to the nines, never made eye contact with us once. Fixated on their notes. And the last person we spoke to came in and said, I'm not sure who you are or why you're here, but I'll be delighted to answer any questions you've got. That was the only useful interaction that we had.
So, dress codes. Tom, you're invited to a fancy event. It says at the bottom, black tie. How do you feel about this?
Delighted.
Is that because you don't have to make choices and somebody else has made them for you?
No, it's more I get a chance to raid the dressing up box.
Of course, yes, you can be James Bond for the evening. No, fair
exactly.
enough. No,
yes.
the reason why I'm checking with that is that when you say you've got a standard set of uniform at the beginning of this recording.
Yep.
The person you actually reminded me of was Barack Obama. And Obama had exactly the same process. He decided that he didn't want to be wasting the brain space of the president of the United States and the leader of the free world on questions like, what should I wear today, as he stood in front of his open wardrobe. And so he just had 24 dark blue suits. Yes. All of his socks were exactly the same color. And in fact, there was one famous occasion when he varied this and for some reason got out or had made a suit. Maybe he thought he was anxious that he wasn't being enough of a peacock's tail, and he had a suit made of which was basically brown taupe, and he wore
tan.
Yes, tan. Yeah, he wore it. Was mercilessly mocked for 2 weeks on all over the world. Never did it again. And so sometimes the kind of somebody else making a decision about what you should wear is freedom, because at least that's the argument I think about school uniform, is that when kids wear the same clothes, they're less likely to make snobbish judgments about the little social variations between individuals, because everyone is at least on the same level in terms of the clothes they wear.
I used to buy only black socks because I had the notion that if I only had black socks, I'd always have a pair. This turns out to be not true at all, because no two black socks are actually identical.
Exactly.
And so what you actually have is a load of socks you cannot pair up. So I joined a sock club for 2 years and was sent a couple of pairs of socks every month or so.
Yeah.
And now I have a wide array of colourful socks. And it's true, there are quite a lot of singletons now because socks just disappear. We don't know where they go or why. But I have colourful socks now. And Alex, it makes me happy every time I put on a pair of colourful socks.
You're absolutely right. I think I remember once reading Jon Snow, the recently retired newsreader of Channel 4, said that if you only wear plain socks, then you've probably given up on life. So it's nice to get you back into it. It's funny. Did you have a stage when socks were a Christmas present that were given to old people?
Yeah.
And now, whenever somebody gives me a pair of socks at Christmas, it's absolutely bloody marvelous for exactly the reason you describe. It means it's going to be, oh great, I can find the pair that goes with that. Okay, so I think the other reason why I have a headache, and this is a legacy really of my days when I was a student, when I was first invited to black tie parties, I didn't have the outfit, and so it was basically a kind of social ticket price. I wasn't going to be basically allowed in. And so I ended up not going to occasional parties. And I don't believe the people who invited me had any idea that they were excluding anybody. They were just assuming that that's what everybody would find flattering, helpful and delightful. But of course, when you're an 18-year-old and you've only got one suit. So we used to call it my angry journalist suit, because what she said when I think it must have been from Marks and Spencer. She said, "Oh yes, you look like an angry journalist." But I didn't have the black tie outfit, I think, until I was about 21. So there is always that element that I think that particular dress codes stratify people, and some people are sort of automatically excluded because they're not familiar with that way of inviting people to parties or going to them, for that matter.
But actors all know how changing into a different costume can radically change the way that you move, how you stand. And so there is a practical reason, as well as just wanting to look nice, wanting the audience to want to take you home, or wanting to show that you've made an effort. If you are doing something like giving a presentation or appearing on camera, then if you're wearing a suit of some kind, again, whether your gender expression is male or female, anything which helps you to stand tall, to move with purpose, to not slouch, all of those things are going to be very, very helpful. And if you pick the right clothes, that will happen automatically without you having to think about it.
It absolutely will. I mean, I know that a good suit will tend to pull your shoulders back and slightly open up your thorax a little bit. And it just kind of reminds people of cartoons of Superman a little bit. And in fact, yes. And this has always been it's come up when talking about stature in status workshops in spaces. I mean, the women and the people who wear high heels listening to this will know that it just shifts the geometry of the eye contact that you're having with people. It just changes your physicality. There is a trade-off, of course, between the extra inches of high heels and the sort of the much more athletic comfort of flat shoes, and it's interesting seeing the different choices that people make today about the shoes they wear, and how it's also changing that physical comfort and deliberateness, rather than the sometimes kind of teetering awkwardness of high heels, can make a difference there.
But that's what a tie does as well. I mean, a tie has a specific meaning which is arbitrary and cultural, but it is a line, a vertical line from the throat down to the belt. And so by drawing a vertical line down the middle of your body, you are making yourself look longer and taller.
Listen to us, Tom. We're like, this is like Coco Chanel.
Like a pair of fashionistas.
Brilliant. If you have a much more intimate relationship with the world of fashion, by the way, please get in touch with us with your own perspective on this, because it may be that there are enjoyable contradictions that we can explore.
But the other thing I did a few years ago is I just went through all my shirts and threw out most of them because they were all getting a bit tatty, and I just bought a load of new shirts from a Charles Twitt, and I prefer cufflinks.
Yep.
I just think they're fun. They're a little bit of male jewellery. And Charles Twitt shirts all come with collar stiffeners.
Yeah, those things.
Little collarbones. So I now have a little collection of, I think they're brass. They're certainly some kind of metal.
You've gone very fancy, Tom.
Collar stiffeners. Yeah,
no, I've got some.
And again, it does make a difference. You get a shirt out of the plastic packaging, and it's sort of a bit starched, and it's all very crisp, and it looks fantastic. But you wear that shirt 2 or 3 times, you wash it 2 or 3 times, and the stiffness in that collar will go. So gentlemen who do not avail themselves currently of collar stiffeners, I do recommend them.
Yeah, no, and Vince, talking about throwing out your old shirts, there's another question on my list here. We've known each other for a long time. Mutton dressed as lamb, Tom. I discovered. I can't remember quite how long ago it was, but I left our old office and walked around the corner and popped along to Camden Parkway, and I went into Gap, Tom. And I looked around and then I walked out again, Tom, because I suddenly realised I've reached the age when I simply don't feel comfortable buying anything, which is, I just suddenly somehow knew, no, I am too old.
Nothing for you.
Yeah, and that's really strange. I mean, I wouldn't in a million years dream of saying to another person, you're a little bit mutton dressed as lamb. But I understood the feeling. I met up with some very old friends, people I hadn't seen literally since I was at school. Last week. What's interesting is when you see someone at 47 and you've known them when you were 12, is that basically they look exactly the same. But of course we don't. We're not meeting somebody who's a grown-up. We're seeing somebody we've known since they were a child. I see my own face, and the hair is slightly more silver at my temples. And that seems to mean I want to wear different kinds of clothes, because I don't want to be seem like I'm trying to be younger than I am. Fancy dress, Tom. You're invited to a fancy dress party. It doesn't say black tie.
Oh,
it says fancy dress. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sort of less keen on that. I have pushed the boat out for a couple of fancy dress parties recently. But I think the objection I have with that, which is sort of a silly one really, if it's something like black tie or morning suit, then I can hire or I can buy something which is actually going to be really nice, which I could wear again if I've bought it, and it's going to kind of make me look fantastic. If it's fancy dress, if I'm going as Peppa Pig or Stannis Baratheon or some other such nonsense, I'm going to probably buy a costume from a costume shop, and it's not going to be something I'm going to want to wear again, and it's going to be a bit kind of nylon-y, plasticky, and it probably isn't going to fit terribly well. To do that kind of thing properly is eye-wateringly expensive.
Yeah.
And so I end up doing it on the cheap, and it looks fine, but it's not something I'm going to wear again. And then, of course, I don't want to throw it away, so it ends up just cluttering up my house. So on purely practical grounds, I'm not keen. But again, what's fun about it is a great leveler. And you go to these parties, and there are people from all walks of life, all of whom look enchantingly ridiculous.
This is it.
And that aspect of it is rather good fun.
Well, no, the good fun element of it is really important. So I have two really kind of very different positions on this. Okay. One is that personally, I find it literally, agonizing. Like if I get invited to a fancy dress party, I'm almost certainly not going to go. And and the reason is that it's something to do with my history as an actor, that basically costume is going to be always incredibly good. Fancy dress can be terrible and it doesn't really matter. And that just causes some kind of sort of mental conniption for me, that I'm going to see people, dressed as a Shakespearean character in a way which would give me tremendous pain if I saw them walking on stage in a Shakespearean performance. So personally, but I know that this is just a kind of a weird emotional quirk of my own. Whereas actually what happens when people go to fancy dress parties is it's incredibly good for morale. If people show up in funny hats or crazy makeup on their faces, it does this, it has this effect of, I think, trashing a lot of very unhealthy assumptions about identity. And I think one reason why it's so popular is that as an actor, you do get an opportunity to try out something completely different, and pretend to be a king or an emperor or a clown or the Hunchback of Notre Dame. But most civilians don't really get that opportunity much. It's a big investment to join an amateur dramatic group or quit everything and go to drama school. And
there is a difference as well between being on stage with a bunch of people on costume and a bunch of people in civvies sitting in rows looking at you, and standing around in a bar or by a pool dressed as the King of Siam or an octopus. Or
there is, but I don't think there is that big a difference for civilians and professionals in the enjoyableness of experimenting with different, being somebody else, I guess, which is why it's rotten of me to say, oh, you and your fancy dress parties, I'm not coming. I should join in as a civilian rather than sneer at a distance as a professional. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any suggestions of themes for us to tackle on this podcast, please do get in touch. I'm Alex at the-spontaneity-shop.com.
And I'm Tom at the-spontaneity-shop.com, or I'm at Tom Selinsky on Twitter.
Please do keep listening through the summer. There will definitely be some podcasts over the summer holiday period, and we'll be back with Adventures in September. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.
Cheerio, bye for now.
You have been listening to You Can Talk to Anyone with Alex McLaren and Tom Selinsky. The producer for The Spontaneity Shop was Tom Selinsky. You Can Talk to Anyone is distributed exclusively by Acast.